My parents live in a modest apartment while I struggle to support them. Then I found a safe deposit box key hidden in my father's old Bible. Inside wasn't money, but evidence that my mother has been blackmailing him for years using a crime I committed as a child. I still remember the night I came home after a 14-hour shift, my clothes damp with sweat and the soles of my shoes worn thin. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My parents were sitting together on the couch, watching television as if nothing in the world was wrong. That contrast, their calm faces against my aching body, hit me harder than any exhaustion. I was the one holding everything together, yet they seemed untouched by the weight pressing down on me. Every morning began before sunrise. I worked at a small bakery from 5 to 10, then rushed to a call center where I answered endless complaints until late afternoon. At night, I cleaned offices downtown, pushing a mop across glossy floors while my mind drifted to unpaid bills waiting at home. I often skipped meals, telling myself I wasn't hungry, though the truth was I couldn't afford more than bread and tea most days. My parents never asked how I managed. They simply accepted the groceries I brought and the rent I paid. There were small sacrifices that piled up like bricks. Friends invited me to weddings, birthdays, even casual dinners, but I always declined. I couldn't justify spending money on gifts or clothes when the electricity bill was overdue. Once, I sold my phone to cover a medical expense, pretending to my parents that I had lost it. They didn't question me. Their calmness grew suspicious over time as if they knew something I didn't. Neighbors often praised me. "You're such a devoted daughter," they said, smiling warmly. Relatives whispered about my strength, comparing me to saints. But behind those compliments was pity. I could see it in their eyes, the unspoken thought that I was wasting my youth, chained to responsibilities that weren't mine. That pity stung more than the exhaustion. It made me wonder if I was truly noble or simply foolish. My father's old Bible became my quiet refuge. He kept it on the nightstand, its leather cover worn and pages yellowed. Sometimes I'd see him reading it silently, his lips moving in prayer. I found comfort in that image, believing it meant he carried faith even when money was scarce. I never suspected that the Bible held more than scripture. To me, it was a symbol of endurance, a reminder that we could survive hardship if we clung to hope. Yet tension simmered beneath the surface. My mother avoided conversations about money. Whenever I asked how she managed expenses before I started working, she brushed me off with vague reassurances. "We always find a way," she'd say, smiling too quickly. Once, when I pressed harder, she snapped, "Don't worry about things you don't understand." That sharpness unsettled me. Why was she so defensive? Why did she act as though my questions were threats? There were moments when I caught her hiding envelopes in drawers or locking herself in the bedroom with the phone pressed to her ear. I assumed she was embarrassed about asking relatives for help, so I didn't pry. But the unease grew. I felt like I was carrying a burden that wasn't entirely mine, and yet I couldn't put it down. The exhaustion became a constant companion. My body ached, my mind fogged, but I kept moving because stopping meant failure. Pride kept me going. The quiet pride of knowing I was keeping my parents afloat even if no one else understood the cost. I told myself that one day when debts were cleared and life was stable, I would finally breathe. But deep down I sensed that day might never come. This was the rhythm of my life. Endless work, hidden sacrifices, and unanswered questions. I believed I was saving my family, but the cracks in their calmness hinted at something darker. I didn't know it yet, but the Bible on my father's nightstand held the key to truths that would shatter everything I thought I knew. The Bible sat on my father's nightstand, its cover cracked and faded from years of use. I had dusted around it countless times, never daring to move it. That evening, though, something compelled me to lift it. As I turned the pages, a small metal object slipped out and clattered onto the floor. A safe deposit box key. My breath caught. Why would my father hide something like this in his Bible? Curiosity gnawed at me. I tucked the key into my pocket, my hands trembling. That night I barely slept. Questions circled endlessly. Was it money, old letters, or something darker? By morning I couldn't resist. I walked to the bank, each step heavy with anticipation. The clerk glanced at the key, then at me before leading me to a quiet room. My heart pounded as the box slid open. Inside there was no money. No jewelry. Just a stack of papers bound together with a worn ribbon. I unfolded them, expecting financial records. Instead, I found a ledger filled with notes, dates, and transactions. At first, the handwriting confused me. Then I saw my mother's name scrawled across the margins. My stomach tightened. The entries revealed years of blackmail. My mother had been using something against my father. Something tied to me. As I read further, the truth hit me like a cold wind. She had been holding over him a mistake I made as a child, a crime I had buried deep in shame. My father hadn't been silent out of weakness. He had been trapped. Memories rushed back. I was 12 when it happened. A foolish dare with friends led me to break into a neighbor's shed. I thought it was harmless fun until I damaged property I couldn't replace. My parents covered it up, warning me never to speak of it again. I carried the guilt quietly, believing I owed them for their protection. That guilt shaped my life, pushing me to work harder, sacrifice more, and repay a debt I thought was mine. Now, staring at the ledger, I realized my mother had twisted that childhood mistake into a weapon. She had used it to control my father, to drain him, and by extension me. Every sacrifice I made, every bill I paid had been built on lies. Anger surged through me. I felt betrayed not only by her deception but by his silence. Why hadn't he told me? Why had he let me believe I was saving them when, in truth, I was being used? My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, each entry another stab of betrayal. I left the bank with the ledger pressed against my chest, the world around me blurred. The sound of traffic, the chatter of strangers, it all faded beneath the roar of my thoughts. I couldn't decide if I wanted to confront her immediately or burn the papers and pretend I had never seen them. But the weight of truth was too heavy to ignore. That night, I sat alone in my room, the ledger spread across the bed. I traced the handwriting, imagining my mother's hand moving across the page, recording each manipulation. My father's silence now seemed less like faith and more like surrender. He had been living under her shadow, and I had been dragged into it unknowingly. The betrayal cut deep. I wrestled with anger, guilt, and confusion. Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand answers. Another part wanted to protect my father, shield him from further pain. But the strongest feeling was rage. Rage at being deceived, at wasting years of my life for a lie. I realized then that my sacrifices had never been about love or devotion. They had been about control. My mother had turned me into a pawn, and my father had let it happen. The ledger was proof, undeniable and cruel. As I closed the book, I knew nothing in my life would ever feel the same again. I sat on the edge of my bed, the ledger spread open before me, its pages heavy with secrets. My chest burned with anger, but beneath it was a hollow ache I couldn't ignore. I had carried my family for years, believing I was saving them. Now I knew I had been nothing more than a pawn. The silence in the apartment pressed against me until I couldn't bear it any longer. I rose, clutching the ledger, and walked into the living room. My mother was folding laundry, humming softly as if life were ordinary. I placed the ledger on the table with a sharp thud. She looked up, startled. "What's this?" she asked, her voice too calm. "You tell me," I said, my tone shaking with fury. "I found it in the bank. In Dad's box. Your handwriting is all over it." Her face stiffened. She tried to laugh it off, claiming it was old notes, but I pressed harder. "Stop lying. You've been blackmailing him for years. Using me, using my mistake, to control him." For a moment, her eyes flickered with panic. Then she straightened, her voice cold. "You don't understand what it takes to survive." My father entered quietly, his shoulders slumped. He didn't deny it. He simply sat down, staring at the floor. That silence cut deeper than her words. He had known, endured, and chosen not to fight. My fury clashed with his resignation, creating a painful divide. I wanted justice, he wanted peace. I couldn't stay silent anymore. "I'm done," I said firmly. "No more money. No more sacrifices. You've drained me long enough." Her lips tightened. "Without you, we'll fall apart." "Then fall," I replied, my voice trembling but steady. "I won't be your shield anymore." The days that followed marked my transformation. I quit one of my jobs, reclaiming hours of my life. When relatives asked why, I told them the truth. Their shock was palpable, but I no longer cared about their pity. I refused to cover her expenses even when she tried to guilt me with tears. Small incidents became milestones. I cooked meals only for myself, leaving her to manage her own. I stopped answering her calls when she demanded money. I even returned a bill unopened, a symbolic act of defiance. Each step felt like peeling away chains that had bound me for years. My father remained quiet, caught between loyalty to her and shame for me. We shared awkward silences, but I sensed his relief. He no longer had to carry the burden alone. I had exposed it. The confrontation changed me. I learned that betrayal can come from those closest, and devotion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. My strength wasn't in endless sacrifice. It was in reclaiming dignity. In the end, I walked away from her manipulation, not with bitterness but with clarity. I had been used, yes, but I had survived. And survival, I realized, meant more than keeping others afloat. It meant refusing to drown for them.